All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to this webinar about Embase. My name is Anne-Marie and I'm your host today. I'm here with our Embase expert Ian Crowlesmith. Ian is our Senior Product Manager for Content Development and a key member of the team managing the indexing of Embase as well as content and coverage. Today Ian will dive into indexing to talk about, for example, principles of indexing and specific areas such as subheadings and how you may use them when searching. We would like to remind you that this webinar is aimed at users with some Embase experience, and we also offer introductory webinars. We'll show you the link to the full webinar calendar at the end of this webinar. So before we get started, some need-to-knows. As we said, we will be placing the webinar slides online and the recording so you can listen to it again in your own time. During the session, we do encourage you to ask questions by using the chat or ask a question function on the webinar control panel, and we'll answer as many of your questions as possible throughout the webinar. Any questions we don't get to, we will compile and send a complete Q&A to you after the webinar. If you wish to have a full screen link, or full screen view, should I say, please click on the red arrow. Your control panel will be hidden and you can click again on the red arrow to see your control panel again. And on the subject of webinars, and just before we hand over to Ian, we have run a number of webinars this year and probably some of you have attended these webinars. So we'd just like to draw your attention to the webinar content which is available on our info site, and you can review all the past content via slides or recordings. We will have a new webinar schedule by the end of this year, so January 2013 we'll be rolling out a new webinar schedule for that year. And now I would like to hand over to Ian so he can tell us all about indexing in Embase.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Anne-Marie, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I'd also like to introduce a colleague of mine who's sitting in on this webinar, Walter Eiselmausen, who's from our indexing team. And if there are any issues come up which call for an in-detail response, I'll ask Walter if he would like to go into that. So in this webinar, I'd like to tell you about how we index Embase and how you can make the best use of our indexing to find the information that you are looking for. I'll begin by showing you how we index a typical article using an example that has most of the features that I want to tell you about. I'll follow that up with a few words about our approach to indexing and show you how Embase indexing has evolved over time. The heart of this webinar will be about how Embase indexes drugs and diseases, what we call in-depth indexing. And after that, I will describe some indexing tools Embase offers outside the area of drugs and diseases, which I hope will help you find the information you're looking for. I might not have time to address all these highlights, and I've grayed out a few topics that I don't expect to have time for. However, if you download this webinar later from the Embase info site, you'll find all these topics included. I do want to emphasize that the Embase approach to indexing is described in an indexing guide that you can find on our info site at the URL shown at the bottom of the page. This is a synopsis of the manual used by our indexers, but still includes quite a bit of detail I won't have time to describe in the 30 minutes or so allotted to this presentation. However, if you have any questions about these aspects, I'll be very happy to try and answer them during the webinar. So, first of all, I'll show you how we index a typical article. This is an article we indexed recently with the concepts highlighted that in one way or another are represented in the Embase indexing. The concepts on this page come from the title and abstract, but if you look further into the article, for example in the methods section, you see there are quite a few index concepts that we pick up here as well. And from the heart of the article, from tables as well as text, and from figures as well, our indexers identify important information that we think is important to index, such as here, information about adverse drug events. In general, Embase indexers are seeking to identify important original information that is presented in the article, rather than hypotheses or ideas that might be mentioned in the discussion. For review articles, our indexers summarize the key points in the review, and other types of articles, such as letters to the editor, may have a mix of original and non-original information that is indexed. For this article, the indexing process resulted in all the terms shown here, divided as you see into drug terms, disease terms, other terms, and additional information. At the right side of each of the blue bars at the top, you can open the drug and disease terms, which is what I will show you next. Here, first of all, is the open drug indexing. And what you see is that each of the drug terms, here identified in the light blue bars, is qualified by a number of other terms. We call these subheadings, which may be key subheadings or other subheadings. Key subheadings have additional information shown in the middle column, which we call triple links. I'll be showing more examples of this shortly. And here is the corresponding disease indexing. In this case, it's quite lengthy because each of the so-called disease terms is actually a side effect of one or more drug terms. Okay, what I will show you now is how our indexers go about identifying all of these index terms. What you see here is an empty index form such as our indexers use. The job of the indexers is to fill in the blanks, and they move from one topic to the next while scanning the full text of the article, but paying a little more attention to the key components such as title, abstract, methods, and tables, as we saw. I won't show all of the index terms identified, but we'll focus on just a couple of drugs and diseases. So here we go. First, the important drugs. Notice that this drug, aclidium bromide, is identified as a major focus term, or A term. This is followed by key drug subheadings and ancillary information, the triple links that I mentioned. Here, the chronic obstructive lung disease is identified as the disease that is being treated by aclidinium bromide. Please notice, by the way, that the major focus is assigned to the drug term and not to the subheading. This is different from the approach taken by Medline. The next subheading is adverse drug reaction, and the triple linked information shows a range of side effects derived from the table which I showed a few minutes ago. This is followed by other key subheading, drug comparison, and another, the route of drug administration, which is actually indexed directly as a subheading. And finally, a set of other subheadings here, clinical trial and drug dose. The minor focus terms, or B terms, are indexed in exactly the same way. Important to note is that the side effects may actually reflect the absence of a side effect. If you check the original table that I showed you before, you can see that this was the case for tooth pain and diarrhea. The key thing is that side effect was looked for by the authors. Therefore, its absence is an important aspect of the article. The disease terms are indexed in an exactly complementary manner. Here is the disease, linked, of course, to aclidinium bromide and formoterol fumarate. This is the inverse of the triple links we saw before. The indexing is not actually done twice, but it is presented to you, the user, from both points of view. We could also have shown a similar picture for each of the side effects, but I'll skip that here. Beyond the drugs and diseases, Embase indexers pay particular attention to the check tags. This is a list of around 50 concepts that are described by scope notes and which we ask indexers to pay particular attention to. As you can see, this article is not just a clinical trial, which was identified as a drug subheading, but in fact a phase 2 trial that is also a randomized control trial. We are particularly keen that terms like these are identified by our indexing staff. This is followed by other check tags, here major clinical study, meaning that more than 50 patients participated, and information about the gender and age of patients, and the all-important human tag. Finally, there is a group of other index terms which, although identified here as minor, represent important aspects of the main focus of the article, for example, dosage information. Everything I have shown you so far is controlled by the Embase thesaurus M-tree, but there is more. Here, you see a part of the index form used for indexing drug and device trade names and manufacturers, as well as clinical trial numbers. One of the drugs is a trade name registered by Novartis in Switzerland. If you check in M-tree, you'll find that Forodil is a trade name for formoterol fumarate. Here are a couple of device names. device trade names indexed for this article. As for the drug trade names, these are linked to the manufacturer names and country if this information is present in the article. Drug trade names have been indexed in Embase since 1974 and device trade names since 1998. Finally, the clinical trial registration number, which in embase.com links out to clinicaltrials.gov, as you can see near the bottom of the next slide. So here once more is the end result that I showed you before. For comparison, you can see here the Medline index for the same record on PubMed. As expected, given the Embase drugs focus, the Embase index is significantly more detailed, especially for drug-related indexing. This is an important difference between Embase and Medline. What I'd like to do now is to drill down into some of these aspects of indexing. But first, let's take a high-level view of what is happening here. Probably, like all databases, Embase indexing serves three main roles: to translate, to expand, and to focus. For example, under the heading Translation, what is special about Embase is the natural language terminology used for indexing and the very large number of synonyms. Expansion stands for the in-depth indexing of drugs, diseases, and in fact also medical devices, which is derived from the full text of the article. And focus refers to the specific tools that Embase makes available to help you drill down to the articles you need. Beyond these principles, it is helpful to bear in mind the actual history of indexing at Embase, which I will highlight in this slide. When Embase, or Medica as it was known then, was founded in 1947, there was already a focus on natural language indexing. About 15 years later, the indexing was consolidated into a single controlled vocabulary, initially with 25,000 terms and 50,000 synonyms. The vocabulary grew by leaps and bounds, reaching an unwieldy 250,000 preferred terms by 1987, which is when we decided to refocus our attention on the top 35,000 terms, which accounted for 90% of the uses, and at the same time, we took the opportunity to introduce a tree structure called M-tree. M-tree was deliberately modeled on mesh, which is why even today there are great similarities between the two thesauri. In fact, during the 1990s, we incorporated every single mesh term into M-tree, and we continue to update M-tree with new mesh terms each and every year. This is why today you can confidently search Embase even using mesh terms. But returning to 1987, the other major change was the introduction for the first time of drug and disease subheadings. We chose to implement a core set of subheadings similar but not identical to the mesh subheadings available in Medline. A few years later, we introduced our 8 item types, also known in Embase.com and other platforms as publication types. Our indexing rule is that every record is identified by a single item type, one of these 8. This is somewhat different from the approach taken by Medline. All along, we had emphasized the importance of a core set of 40 to 50 index terms known as the check tags, which I mentioned before. And in 1993, we began extending the check tags with terms relevant for evidence-based medicine, beginning with a randomized controlled trial. I'll describe how the tags are used in a little bit more detail later on. More recently, in 2009, we introduced automatic indexing to allow us to begin indexing conference abstracts. It would have been impossible for us to do this manually, and automatic indexing ensures that the key concepts are retrievable via M-tree. The growth of M-tree, and before 1987, the Embase controlled vocabulary, is spread over more than 65 years. M-tree now accounts for more than 60,000 preferred terms and nearly 300,000 synonyms, and is still growing. Most recently, we have focused on medical devices terminology, and this year have added over 600 new device-related terms, bringing the total coverage to over 1,500 terms. So to summarize the timeline, let me just say that although new features have been introduced in every decade, one feature is timeless. This is that even though M-tree was only introduced in 1987, you can use M-tree to search right back to the earliest record in 1947. For example, if you explode high-level terms in the medical devices tree, you retrieve records indexed in Embase all the way back to 1947. Of course, Some of the other index tools, such as subheadings, are only applicable back to the time they were introduced. As you can imagine, it wasn't possible for us to re-index Embase articles from earlier than 1987 with subheadings. Okay, that's the introduction. What I would like to do now is a deep dive into how we index drugs on Embase. The reference here is to the Embase indexing guide I mentioned before, where you can find lots more information than I have time to tell you about here, and hopefully answers to many of the detailed questions you may have. Perhaps most important is that all significant mentions of drug terms are indexed. Significant means whenever there is new information presented about a drug, such as all the side effects. This means that Embase typically indexes articles with many more drugs than PubMed. And if the indexer finds a drug term that is not yet in Emtree, he still indexes it as a so-called candidate term. As far as Emtree is concerned, we want to ensure that new terms are recognized as soon as possible. And to do that, we add new generic terms to Emtree proactively as soon as they are known. And for a couple of years now, we have been updating Emtree 3 times a year. All drugs and diseases are indexed with one or more subheadings where possible, and we have identified 5 subheadings as key subheadings, which I'll explain shortly. And last but not least, and completely separate from Emtree, we index drug trade names and manufacturer names. Many of these trade names are synonyms in Emtree and can be mapped to generic drug names. But regardless of the mapping, you can search for trade names in their original formats in our trade names field. So let's look at an example of how this might work. And let's suppose you're interested in developing new drugs for cystic fibrosis. In this example, I'm imagining that you found an article, this article, which mentions the treatment of cystic fibrosis with a new drug, Kalydeco, which, as you can see here, is a chloride channel stimulator. This might make you wonder what other similar drugs could be under development. On Emtree, you can quickly identify Kalydeco as a synonym of ivacaftor. Ivacaftor was added to Emtree in 2011 and is listed as an ion transport affecting agent. From the list of ion transport affecting agents, it seems there is as yet no term for chloride channel stimulating agents. Actually, I can divulge this is coming in the very next Emtree release in December. So let's go with ion transport affecting agents. So the question is, are there similar drugs under development in this category for treating cystic fibrosis? Even if they are not yet listed in Emtree, you can easily find them. And here's how you do it. First of all, you can search the entire category by clicking on the link indicated by the red arrow. The result is shown here. This explosion search with /exp captures all the articles in the entire category. What you can now do is to edit the search to retrieve only records indexed with the category name itself. To do that, you can change the explosion to an exact search using /de. Why should you do this? The reason is that Embase indexers are instructed to index using the most specific term in Emtree. But if the term they want to index is not yet even in Emtree, they have to index the next best thing, its category. In this case, that is ion transport affecting agent. And as you can see, this already brings the number of results down by nearly 3 orders of magnitude to 367. Of course, the indexer also indexes the new drug as a candidate term, but as we don't know what that is, we can't search it directly. Fortunately, there is a way around this. Let me just remove that part of the screen. In the case of candidate drug terms, there is one more thing the indexer has to do. He indexes the term unclassified drug to indicate that he is assigned a candidate term. You can make the results even more specific by searching the disease name as well. The third result here looks quite promising, so let's have a look at the index. As you can see, quite a few drug names are listed, including ivacaftor, the drug we started with. If you click on this, you get more information about why it has been indexed in this article. As I mentioned before, this kind of indexing that we see here is called triple indexing because the subheading links two other terms. In this case, the triples are a drug linked to two other drugs and a drug linked to a disease. You can't actually search on triples yet, but you can see in the actual results what is linked with what, as here. If you click on the other terms, for example, VR496, that brings up similar information, and similarly, VX661. Although you can't see which of these drugs are candidate terms, it's quite likely that one or more of the lab codes is in fact a candidate term. For example, if you click on the symbol next to VX661, those three little circles there, you can check whether the drug is in Emtree. In this case, VX661 is not recognized by Emtree, so it must have been a candidate term. In this same article, the trade names or lab codes are also indexed separately, together with their manufacturers. The indexing rule is that all these trade names are also searchable in the descriptor field as drugs. First of all, the codes highlighted in the red box were all indexed without any change as drug terms in this article. You can see this by comparing the terms of the drug index at the bottom of the slide. This means they are either Emtree preferred terms in their own right or candidate terms, like VX661. However, the two lab codes on the right don't seem to have been indexed as drug terms, so what are they? A quick check in Emtree, now searching with the letters VX, shows they are in fact the codes for either Caftor and Lumacaftor. What happened in both cases is that the codes were matched to their generic names, and it is the generic names that appear in the index. So far, I've talked about how drugs are listed in Emtree, about triple indexing, and about trade names and manufacturer names. What I haven't really mentioned is the full breadth of subheadings that the indexer has at his disposal and how to search them, which is the subject of this slide. This is the drug search form in Embase.com, and within this search form you can find all 17 drug subheadings together with 47 routes of drug information. If, for example, you're interested in adverse drug reaction, you can find its scope note here in Emtree. Adverse drug reaction is an interesting one because it is limited to side effects reported at therapeutic dose ranges. If you were interested in side effects at non-therapeutic levels, you'd need to use a different subheading, drug toxicity. As well as in Emtree, you can find all of the scope notes in Appendix 3 of the Embase Indexing Guide. So let's set up a search using this form. Because it's easy to do, I decided to use the first two subheadings in this list linked to aspirin. It was adverse drug reaction and clinical trial. And as you see, I can choose to combine the subheading using and or, and I have chosen and. I've also chosen to search aspirin as a major focus term. Here are the results. The major focus is represented in the search using /MJ, and the adverse drug reaction and clinical trial subheadings are represented by the codes /DDAE and /DDCT respectively. The AND logic has resulted in the two subheadings being linked separately to aspirin. I've also shown in the first record retrieved here aspirin, or actually its preferred term acetyl salicylic acid, which is highlighted because it was one of the search terms. If you click on it, you see the three triple indexes with a third one indicating that aspirin is used in this article as drug therapy for a whole range of diseases. Clinical trial, one of the terms we searched, is shown as one of the other subheadings. You can search disease subheadings in an analogous way. Here I've decided to link cystic fibrosis, once again as a major focus term, with three subheadings: surgery, therapy, and drug therapy. The choice of drug therapy is hidden at the moment because I scrolled forward in the disease subheadings box to surgery and therapy. In this case, I want to combine these using OR because I'm interested in any of these modes of therapy. By the way, the subheading side effect is the exact mirror image of adverse drug reaction. Where a drug is linked via subheading adverse reaction to a disease, the disease is always linked in the same article by the subheading side effect of the causative drug. Anyway, the results of our actual search are shown at the bottom of this slide. As you can see, the OR mode of this search resulted in the codes of the three subheadings being grouped together using a comma separator. So one final point about subheadings. How can you search for subheadings on their own without specifying in advance what they are linked to? The answer is illustrated here using pharmacokinetics as an example. You could, of course, combine the subheading and explosion search with the whole category if you know which category you're interested in. But if not, here's how you can do the search using the LNK field label. A search with pharmacokinetics as a normal entry term gives quite different results. The 140,000 results retrieved by search 3 are literally retrieving articles indexed with this term, and not, or at least not necessarily by the subheading. You could also do an explosion search using pharmacokinetics, as in this final search. As you can see from the M-tree inset, this retrieves records indexed with any one of a great number of terms, and even this does not retrieve all of the articles in set 1. I haven't shown it here, but if you combine sets 1 and 4, the overlap is only about 180,000 records. So the lesson here is you have to be quite careful how you formulate your search. Embase provides several tools to help you, but it's up to you to decide how to deploy them. So this covers the focus on drugs, the in-depth indexing. And what I'd like to touch on now is a number of other indexing tools, which, as I mentioned, may help you with your searching. I won't, in any case, talk about the grayed out topics, but they'll be in the copy of the webinar you find via our info site.
Ian, can I just interrupt slightly as well and say that so we're coming up to the last 15 minutes or so of the webinar, so it would be good to spend a little bit of time going through some questions as well.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
We have a few questions, and I think a little bit of time in Embase would be good. So yeah, let's see how we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a question you want to ask now?
No, it's fine. Sorry. So if you want to go through a couple more slides, and then we'll dive into the questions.
Okay, I'll move on. So this slide shows indexing with major terms. I've shown you how to search this, so I probably don't need to say very much more about it. Here, for example, is the article about cystic fibrosis that we started with. The major terms are all in bold, and as you can see, cystic fibrosis and most of the drug terms are major in this article. Considering the title of this article, that's probably not too much of a surprise. And here is a completely different article. In this case, there are several drug index terms, but none of them are major. The major concepts are now all disease and other terms. Again, this should not be too much of a surprise, given the top of the article. For every term, the frequency with which it is indexed as a major term will be a little different. For diazepam, for example, it's a little less than 50%. Actually, this is only half the story. It turns out that for the past 10 years, diazepam has been indexed as a major term only about 10% of the time. And this therefore gives you great power of discrimination if you need to focus your search on the key results. The same pattern applies to many drugs that have been indexed over the past decades. The second topic on my list was M-tree. M-tree is now updated 3 times each year, and you can find lists of added and changed terms at the URL, which I think will be shown on this slide, and if not, you can find on our info site. When we make these updates, we also reload embase.com to update the indexing of older records whose indexing has changed, and we call this backposting. Using the example we searched on earlier, we can see in M-tree that ivacaftor was introduced in M-tree in 2011. However, if you search on ivacaftor, you can find records that are indexed with this term as early as 2007. These earlier records mean backposted, and if you look at their indexes, they will indeed display the current term, ivacaftor. The value of this to you as a searcher is you don't need to worry about name changes in M-tree. You can confidently search using the current version of M-tree, knowing that you will not miss any records that were indexed slightly differently in the past. They will have been backposted. And by the way, please note the complete list of filters at the left side of this web page. I'll come back to this in a moment when we look at study types. Next point on the agenda was check tags. The use of check tags is described in the Embase indexing guide, and you can find a full list with scope notes in Appendix 2 of that guide. As I've mentioned a couple of times before, there are around 50 check tags, and a few examples are shown on this slide. You can search check tags either as a normal entry terms or in some cases advanced limits. Choice is up to you. For example, here is the check tag for male showing identical results with both approaches. While on the topic of limits, I just want to mention one limit that's rather different. This is the limit to animals. Earlier this year, as part of a reorganization of the organisms facet in M-tree, this term moved to its rightful place at the head of one of the most important groups of organisms. Unfortunately, this means that in M-tree, humans are defined as animals. But searchers usually want to search animals with the meaning all animals except for humans. To meet this need, we have re-engineered the animal limit to cover all animals except for humans, and the profile we used is shown here. Now, as you recall from a couple of slides back, the check tags included a group of study types such as major clinical study and randomized controlled trial. Another way of finding study types is to use the filters at the left-hand side of the results page, which I showed you a few slides ago. All of the study types mentioned here for one particular search are taken from the M-tree facet on types of article or study. This is a rich source of terms that you can use to filter your search, and it now includes 10 so-called topic terms shown here, which I described last month in an Embase webinar on evidence-based medicine. If you want to follow up on this, you can access those slides via the Embase info site. The definition of topic terms, by the way, mirrors the definitions of similar terms which the National Library of Medicine uses to index Embase. The last topic I want to address here is the indexing of Medline records on Embase. As you can see, almost 9 million records on Embase.com are licensed from the National Library of Medicine. You can access them using the search shown here, where the records are deduplicated against Embase and Embase Classic are knotted out. These records are spread over the years of Embase, including the early years before 1974, also covered by Embase Classic. For all of these records, we use the Medline indexing, which we map against M-tree in order to ensure that these Medline records are fully retrievable in all searches using M-tree. The details of how we do this are described in the white paper whose URL is shown here. For example, the mapping for mesh subheadings has to take into account that for some of them there is no equivalent Embase subheading. A portion of this mapping is shown here from Appendix 2 of the white paper. And as you can see, a mapping to Embase subheadings has been set up for 19 of the mesh subheadings. And for the remaining 64 mesh subheadings, we generate M-tree terms as shown for a selection of these terms at the bottom of the slide. And quickly, while I'm on the topic of Medline, I want to mention how our in-depth drug indexing policy at Embase affects your search compared with the equivalent search on Embase. In the white paper described here, there is a table showing equivalent drug searches for 10 top drugs in 2011. And the results are quite clear. You can retrieve 2 to 12 times more information from Embase. I do want to make clear this does not mean you have to wade through up to 12 times as much information to find the results you need. What it does mean is that with Embase, we can be much more certain that the results you need is included in your results set, which may not be the case for the equivalent search on Embase. The next step is up to you. You have all the tools at your disposal that I've described in this webinar and more. For example, limiting to major focus terms, using check tags, applying search limits, or refining your search using filters. So to summarize, I'd like to bring up one of these slides, this slide that I began with, to draw your attention to 3 components of indexing in Embase, and in fact in any database. So once again, translation or mapping using the M-tree thesaurus, expansion, or using indexing to expose the content of the full article, and focus, or applying index terminology to limit your search to exactly the results you need. In Embase, we apply these 3 principles in very specific ways. By using an extensive thesaurus with 300,000 synonyms, we ensure that your search terms are effectively translated to our terminology. by indexing drugs, diseases, and medical devices in depth, we expand the range of your search beyond what you can find in PubMed. And by providing a wide range of tools to help you focus your search, we give you effective control over the search results you get. So thank you very much for your attention. Good luck with your next search on Embase, and I would welcome any questions. Emma?
Yes, thanks, Ian. Maybe it's a good idea to open up Embase, which we haven't done so far. We have a couple of questions asking about clinical trials, Ian, and how you would find, we have one, can you repeat what is a major clinical trial in M3?
A major clinical trial?
So I think maybe there's a little bit of confusion about major terms and clinical trials, so it might be good just to show it in M3 and then show where the major focus is again.
Let's just have a look at M3. If we just type in trial, here is clinical trial. So you can see that clinical trial stands at the top of a small tree which includes controlled clinical trial, multi-center study, and various phases. Clinical trial near the bottom is identified as both a drug subheading, which I showed you, which is used when the clinical trial of a drug is reported, but also as a check tag which is used for reports of prospective clinical trials, etc., but also includes veterinary trials. Now, if you click on clinical trial here, you pull up all 928,000 articles which have been indexed with clinical trial or any of its narrower terms. If we want to look at clinical trial specifically, we make that an exact search by replacing the EXP with DE. So you can see that 800,000 of these were indexed with the actual term clinical trial rather than any of its narrower terms. And if you want to ask how many of them are major terms, the answer will be not so many, I think, because in general, a clinical trial is not a major aspect of the article that we index. The major aspects will be the drugs and the diseases, and clinical trial describes the context within which those are indexed. In these particular articles, 16,000 of them, you see the first one. It's an interesting, I didn't get on to talk about the automatic indexing, but this is an in-process article, and the in-process articles are indexed automatically, and one of the rules that we use for automatic indexing is that terms which are found in the title, such as here clinical trial, will be indexed as major terms. This is not generally the rule for manual indexing. If we move on down here, all of the articles on this page are either in-process articles or articles in press. I'm just looking to see if there are any examples, and there aren't any. I'll just look at the 8th page. So here, for example, number 180, there's an example of a manually indexed article which has been indexed with clinical trial as a major term. If we open up the index terms, you can see that indeed it's highlighted in bold here to indicate that it's a major term. But that's not very frequent for the check tags such as clinical trial.
Ian, the question actually, I've got a little bit more clarity on it now, and it did refer to a definition that you gave somewhat back in the presentation about the number of patients recruited. Can you remember?
Okay, there's another term which is major clinical study.
Yes,
so I'll
that's
just,
the one.
bring that up. Which will be down here somewhere. This is listed within the clinical study group, and you can see there's an entry scope note. This is a check tag as well. It's used for original items reporting clinical work on greater than 50 patients. And if you look at the group of terms under clinical study, you can see major clinical study here. You can also see clinical article. If I open up clinical article, it's another check tag used for original items reporting clinical work on between 5 and 50 patients. If I go back and then open up case report, you can see case report is another check tag used for original items reporting clinical work on not more than 4 individual cases. So these 3 check tags together, they enable you to pinpoint articles which are reporting research on different numbers of patients, going from individual cases all the way up to studies with more than 50 patients.
And we had one question, Ian. Yes, yeah, that was indeed the question. I just got clarity on that, so thank you. And we had one question around that again. It's a hot topic. Do you happen to know if the 50 patients or the numbers listed are the patients, the number of patients at the start of the study, or the number of patients at the end of the follow-up?
I think for this question, I'm going to ask my colleague Walter, who's been sitting here very patiently and is somewhat more knowledgeable on the details of the indexing, if he can help out.
Well, there are no rules specifically about when the numbers should be counted for the check tag to be indexed, but usually we take it from the beginning of the study.
Okay.
Okay.
Super.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay.
Thank you, Walter.
And Ian, would you mind jumping back into Embase? We had a question on seeing which subheadings are used with which entry term. So it might be useful to just show that to the audience.
Which subheadings are used with which entry
So
term?
how would you see in an article, how would you see, once you've run your search, in the articles found, which subheadings were indexed?
Okay. So we just have to run a search.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Of course, so let's do that quickly. We'll pick up a few subheadings here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing it with an AND, as I showed you before, and I'll search those. So we've got exactly one article with this search.
Oh, right.
And,
and the answer is no. Yes,
fortunately,
nice.
we have one. 2 ways you can look at it. Either you can just click on the index term tab here, and then for each of the drugs, you can just hover with your mouse, and you can see the subheadings which are listed. I'm doing that quickly. Yeah. Or else you can go into the full indexing by clicking on the title, and here are the same drug terms we just saw, but you can open all of them, and we can get a complete list of all of the subheadings for all of the drugs. In these cases, let me just see. This is an article from 2005.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually before we introduced the key subheadings, the triple indexing that I mentioned before, which was in 2009, I believe. And you can see, therefore, that there are no actual subheadings listed as key subheadings, but there are long lists of subheadings.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question, Anne-Marie?
I think so, yes. And we have just about run out of time, Ian. If you wouldn't mind just going to the last slide that we have.
Okay.
And it only leaves us with time to thank Ian for his wonderful presentation, bringing us true indexing in Embase. We do have a couple of questions that we didn't get to. A lot of questions looking at what people are doing in Medline and wondering how that translates to Embase. So we'll take a look at all of those questions and compile the answers and make sure that we send them to you as quickly as possible. And where we can refer you to the white paper that Ian mentioned, then we will, so you have that reference for yourself going forward. And of course, any other questions that you have that you didn't get an opportunity to ask today, then please do let us know. You can contact us at BD Training. This is our last Embase webinar for 2012. We've had a good run of webinars this year, and you can indeed find all of our webinars that we've run at the URL that's given here on our info site, and we will be creating a new schedule for 2013, so we very much hope to meet some or all of you in the new year for the new webinar schedule. So thank you, Ian, thank you, Walter, for attending as well, and thank you to the audience, and we hope to see you at the next Embase webinar in 2013. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.